Hello. This presentation came about from a meeting I had with a customer last week. This customer is deploying MicroStrategy to replace Power BI. I realized that they were convinced that MicroStrategy was the right platform, but they weren't entirely clear why. The answer was one word, and that word is schema. My name's Nick Barth, and I'm a senior sales engineer at MicroStrategy. Let's take a look at the power of the MicroStrategy schema. So today's mission is to show you the alternative ways that MicroStrategy can reach and use data, and also to show you the power of the MicroStrategy schema. So our mission at MicroStrategy is intelligence everywhere. What does this mean? First, modern analytics. That really means getting information to the people in your organization who need it, whoever they are, on whatever device they find the most appropriate. Second, being technically agnostic. Working with your data sources, your tools, and your infrastructure, the ones that our customers use every day. And finally, providing trusted data through rigorously designed methods. This means optimized queries, reuse of business logic, and most importantly, single version of the truth. So why is single version of the truth so important? Well, partly it's because current visualization tools have made single version of the truth quite a difficult thing. Let's take a look at the elements that make up a typical dashboard. Every dashboard has a connection back to the source data, ODBC, JDBC, REST API, whatever it happens to be. Every dashboard has a query, the code that gets the data from the data source into the dashboard. Visualization tools tend to work with data sets, so the data from the query ends up in a cached data set in memory. Best practice says to make these data sets shared resources, but we know that this can be a challenge. Many analysts end up building their own data sets. Every dashboard also has derived metrics, groupings, hierarchies, and other business logic. Then there is the dashboard itself, panels with visualizations, the thing that you share with other users. Typically, this is saved as a single file. Now, the way we find most enterprises use these elements is like this. They end up building a dashboard, then that dashboard becomes multiple dashboards. And before you know it, you have many, many dashboards, each with their own queries, their own business logics, based on their own data sets. In other words, multiple interpretations of the truth. The problem is that many BI tools have confused single point of the truth for single version of the truth. Because each of the data sets has its own query, its own business logic, we get the same silos, the same differing interpretations of the numbers. What's our solution? Our answer is the enterprise semantic graph. This is the language of the business, enshrined in logic, business terms that users understand. The semantic graph gives you a 360-degree view of the business. You can break down departmental silos and provide enterprise-wide data access. It involves object reusability for efficient development of content. So if everybody uses the same KPIs, we define those KPIs once. It fundamentally delivers trust and governance because everybody is using the same business logic which has been signed off. Then there's usage telemetry. Tooling around the semantic graph can tell all sorts of interesting things. Who is using which logic, who is using which objects, who is not using the application, for example. And then finally, this tooling is all open to the other tools that you love. Now, there's a reason why organizations find this transition from visualization tools to a full semantic graph difficult. And this is why. In our experience, every organization has queries, and it's the queries that make this process difficult. We see companies all the time where a query is the recognized method for getting data into a report or a dashboard. The query may have been written using another tool, SAS, Python, or just SQL. The people who wrote the query may not be with the company anymore. No one really understands how the query works in the first place, and breaking it down into individual logical steps becomes incredibly hard. Because the query is so fragile, it's in essence unmaintainable. And yet this is the basis for many mission-critical reports. Organizations like my customer, the customer I mentioned, they're looking for a way out of this nightmare. My customer asked me to explain how MicroStrategy is different. Fortunately, my colleague Thierry Duval has created a single slide which shows how MicroStrategy delivers single version of the truth against multiple data sources. My enterprise has multiple sources of data. Some are data warehouses, some are other sources like cubes and applications, flat files, and so on. My users need to access data from them all. Best practice in MicroStrategy is to build a schema. This is a semantic layer of reusable objects such as attributes and metrics. MicroStrategy uses the schema objects to compose dynamic, optimized queries to the data sources. Because the definitions are common, all those queries use the same reusable building blocks of business logic. Let's call this the green approach. This isn't official MicroStrategy nomenclature, but my customer found it useful while we were presenting. The data sources for this approach are likely to be structured, such as a data warehouse. The schema can also power in-memory BI. So as you could see, it controls the governance with common business language shared by everyone, centralized object metadata, and security on data and objects. It generates dynamic query code, and it can also support in-memory structures. We call these things intelligent cubes, and they're robust in-memory structures which can add speed to slow data sources. Now, we all know occasions when users need to see data in their dashboards that doesn't come from the warehouse. So MicroStrategy has an alternative approach. Data import is a business user-oriented interface which allows people to import data from more than 200 different data sources. Databases, cubes, systems, even flat files, and Excel. Let's call this the blue approach. There's no schema, but there are data sets, in-memory structures which use the same technology as our intelligent cubes. Data sets can be managed, refreshed, and governed using the MicroStrategy platform. The end user can build data sets which can connect to data sources. They can prepare and certify the data. They can manage security on objects and data, and they can manage automatic refresh. The work pattern here is likely to be ad hoc data access, but users can define in-memory or live queries to the same data warehouse if required. Users will consume that data using reports, dashboards, hyper-intelligent cards, mobile apps, but for now, let's focus on dossiers. Dossier 1 is based wholly on data from the green approach. It's completely governed by the semantic graph and can be controlled to a very fine degree, with row and column level access possible. Again, the data can be in memory or live, depending upon the requirements of the user. Dossier 2 is based on those prepared data sets in the blue approach. There's less reusable business logic here, and there's no guarantee of single version of the truth, except that the blue and the green approaches can be blended. And in MicroStrategy, when governed data is blended with ungoverned data, governed data always wins. Finally, Dossier 3 here doesn't use data sets at all. We have given the dossier designer, the analyst, the ability to populate this dashboard from any data that they have access to. In approach 3, the dossier is the object that will govern, letting the analyst share it with as many or as few colleagues as we believe is appropriate. Again, the dossier can access data live or in memory, and these three approaches can all be blended in one dossier or even in one visualization. So on my slide, the green approach represents MicroStrategy's secret sauce, except that the way you can blend all three is what makes MicroStrategy really special. Let's take a look at those approaches in more detail. I'm going to start things off with the blue approach, metadata but no schema. We're starting out in Workstation now. We're going to open up or create a new data set using data import. Now I have a data warehouse sitting here, and we're going to create firstly a very simple time hierarchy, month, quarter and year, and then a relatively simple customer hierarchy, and a fact table. Hit prepare data, and the first thing I'm going to do is just strip out some of these translated columns because we're really not going to need them in the final data set in MicroStrategy. And really what we're doing here is we're creating a data set in the same way that we might do in Power BI or Tableau. I'm making sure that I've got customer ID and customer name, month ID and month name, and so on as attribute forms. Making sure that everything is an attribute that should be an attribute, and everything that it should be a metric is also a metric. It's a straightforward task. Because this is a nice homogeneous warehouse, the implied joins are all there, and we're now ready to go. So I'm going to save this data set in my project. Next, I wanted to create a dossier for my customer to show how easy it was to put together some visualizations based on the data that we've just imported from the database. I'm putting together a year filter, and then we are going to add some KPI widgets. By the way, this dossier is going to win no prizes for great aesthetic design, but it's going to do the job. I'm adding a derived metric inside the dossier. Bit of data formatting, and then we'll add some more visualizations. I thought I'd use a natural language query visualization here. Make it a little bit more colorful. We're going to add a map now. Using that customer state attribute and total dollar sales. Switching it to area. Changing the color scheme. And then adding just a little bit of interactivity. So now let's save that dossier into the project. And I think we're done. There. Next, let's try the green approach. We're going to build the same project, the same schema in essence, but this time using the full semantic graph. We're starting off with a new project called Schema Development. And as you can see, there are no objects there, no schema objects. Let's fire up the warehouse catalog, and we're going to pick the same 6 tables that we just used in data import. So the similar, same time hierarchy, the same customer hierarchy. And finally the fact table. Save and close. And now let's go into the graphical architect. And you can see there are the tables. And we're now going to build out those attributes, including the attribute forms. So year, month, quarter, it's a very similar look and feel to data import. Similar process. These are hypothetical joins that we're creating, not actual joins. They'll be joins that are expressed in the SQL that's generated by the MicroStrategy SQL engine. Now in that fact table, we're going to turn those things into facts. And the very fact that they are facts means that MicroStrategy will create some metrics for us using a very simple sum rule. Now we're going to create those simple hierarchies. So year, month and quarter. This will enable drilling. And then call center. To state and city. Well, in fact, I think that's state and region. Save and update the schema. And that's all done. Now we're going to jump back to MicroStrategy Workstation. We're going to fire up that certified dossier that we created based on the imported data, and we'll remap it. It's a certified dossier, so I need to tell it that I want to make that change. Here you can see that data set. Let's go to change the objects for existing objects. I'm simply going to drag and drop those attributes that I created in the schema, and again those metrics that we created in the schema. So these are the things that we just did in the last step. Add that to the dossier, and then we get this rather handy remap dialog. Now you'll notice that gross dollar sales has become sum of gross dollar sales. That's the default metric name that MicroStrategy applies when it automatically creates those metrics. Of course, we can rename those, we can do whatever we like with those objects. Those are now reusable objects as part of the schema. And MicroStrategy has refreshed that dossier. Let's take a look at one of the queries. You can open up the query details for any of those panels. We can see what objects are there, what it ran. In this case, everything has come off a single in-memory load, but it's come off the schema, and that's the big difference. The green approach gives you full access to the MicroStrategy semantic graph, which is a rich panoply of business logic enshrined in objects. So next, let's take a look at a couple of things that you can do with a semantic graph. Firstly, we're going to automatically add a new table to the schema. And then secondly, I'm going to show you what you can do with transformations. Let's take a look at that now. We'll go back into Architect now. And then select a new fact table. This one has some item detail in it. And you'll see that MicroStrategy automatically recognizes those attributes and their relationships with the data that's already on the table, including facts. We'll update the schema now. And now we can use that for drilling to the item detail. Next, let's take a look at transformations. Let's create a new transformation based on our month table. You'll see that in the month table we've got a column which gives us the month ID of months last year. So I'm going to create a new transformation called last year month. Update the schema. In MicroStrategy Web, that transformation is now available for use and will automatically create some time intelligence for us. I'm going to create a simple report now based on those attributes and metrics that we created in the schema. We're going to add a view filter because I just want to focus on 2016, because that transformation is going to give me month-by-month comparisons, in this case from 2016 to 2015. So just by right-clicking on that metric and clicking on transformation, I can create a value, I can create a variance, and now I can save that report. Then let's go back to the dossier. Let's add a new page to the dossier. And now add some new data, and let's go back to that report. So because that report has transformations in it, that transformation behavior is then inherited by the dossier. So I'm adding those derived metrics that we created in part of the report, making sure that's the right way around. And now we have the same time intelligence inherited through into that dossier. In conclusion, thanks to Thierry's slide, myself and my customer are having a conversation on equal terms about the many ways in which MicroStrategy can access data. So we're talking about the green approach or the blue approach and what's most appropriate for a business problem. But because my customer is a bank, I'm steering them down the green approach for the vast majority of these problems, especially access to the data warehouse, because the fully modeled schema gives us not just a rich panoply of objects, but also true SQL generation with data security, ACLs and security filters and so on. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks very much for your time. See you next time. Bye-bye.